The judge banged his gavel. The sound echoed like a sharp blow to Muhammad Ali's soul. 3 years in prison, a heavy fine, and the immediate loss of his world title. The crime, refusing to fight in Vietnam. Ali didn't tremble. His gaze was steady, but his breathing was heavy, as if each breath were a challenge. Outside, the crowd was divided. Some chanted his name with pride. Others spat on the ground as if he were the symbol of cowardice. He, the man who dominated the ring with speed and poetry, was now portrayed as a traitor to his country. The newspaper headlines were relentless. Ali turns his back on America, from hero to national disgrace. Sponsors vanished. Invitations to events vanished. Longtime friends avoided his gaze. On the streets, people who had once asked for autographs now muttered insults as he passed. No matter how many times he repeated that his refusal was based on principle, because he didn't believe in a war that killed innocent people and sent young black men to die in the name of a cause that wasn't theirs, no one wanted to listen. The phone rang rarely. His home, once filled with laughter and visitors, now felt like an abandoned territory. The silence was broken only by the hate mail that arrived daily, its words sharp enough to cut through any pride. Still, Ali didn't give in. "I'm not going to fight the Viet Cong. None of them ever called me a nigger." The phrase, uttered in an interview, became fodder for his critics. But for him, it was the raw truth. Without a ring, without a title, without income, he began to feel the weight of his downfall. His training continued, but his body, without competitions, seemed to complain about the lack of a battle to fight. Sweat poured down his face, but there were no crowds to cheer. The sandbags were his only opponents, and deep down he knew that time was running out. The boxing world moved on, new names emerged, and his reign was already being treated as a distant past. One night, sitting in the kitchen, he heard the radio announce another world title fight. It wasn't for him, it couldn't be. His license was revoked. Indignation burned in his chest. He who saw himself as the greatest of all time was trapped in the role of spectator in his own history. But in that bitter silence, a plan was germinating. He knew that if he returned, he wouldn't be welcomed as a hero. He would be the man who betrayed his country, who lost everything, who should be forgotten. But there was something in him that wouldn't accept that end. The return wouldn't be triumphant, it would be bloody. He would have to step into the ring as an outcast, facing not only his opponent but the hatred of an entire nation. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. Because Ali didn't just want to win a fight. He wanted to prove that a man can lose everything and still hold his head high before the world. And as the night wore on, the kitchen lights casting shadows across the floor, he clenched his fists. There was no turning back. Either he would be reborn, or he would die trying. The day of the announcement arrived. Muhammad Ali stood before the cameras, officially announcing his return to boxing. But the press conference wasn't a sea of applause and friendly flashbulbs. Journalists surrounded him with sharp questions, trying to turn him into a villain again. "Don't you think it's hypocritical to fight again for the same country you refused to defend?" a reporter asked with a wry smile. Ali took a deep breath, looked directly into the camera lens, and replied, "I don't fight for the government, I fight for the people. And I've always fought for my dignity." The phrase made headlines and divided opinion when he stepped into the gym for his first public training session. The boos came before he even touched his gloves. Some fans threw coins on the floor, as if calling him a sellout. Others held up signs with "traitor" in bold letters. Ali didn't look away. He followed the ritual, stretching, rope, shadowboxing, and then heavy punches on the sandbag. Each blow felt like he was unloading years of silence and humiliation. He knew he was out of rhythm, but his hunger to fight was greater than any fatigue. The specialized press was unforgiving. Articles said he was finished, but his reflexes were no longer what they once were. Some compared his return to a desperate act, driven solely by the need for money. And it was true that his finances were in ruins. But there was something much deeper at stake. For Ali, this fight wasn't just against a physical opponent, it was against a label. They'd tried to stick on him forever. The first fight announced for his comeback was against Jerry Quarry, a solid, respected opponent, but no one saw him as an insurmountable obstacle. The media called the event the test of truth. If Ali won, he would still face years of criticism. If he lost, his career would be buried there. Behind the scenes, few believed he could go far again, but Ali fed on this disbelief. On fight night, the entrance to the ring resembled a courtroom. Boos mingled with a few timid applause. Ali's face was serene, but his eyes were hard as stone. When the bell rang, he moved as if he'd never left. His jabs were quick, his footwork precise. The crowd slowly began to realize that the traitor still had the champion spark. In the third round, a well-placed right hand shook Quarry. The fight ended in the seventh, with Ollie winning, but the silence after the announcement said it all. He won, but he hadn't won back America's heart. Not yet. In the locker room, sweaty and exhausted, Ali looked into the cameras and said, "This is just the beginning. If you think you've knocked me out, just wait until you see what's next." It was an open challenge, not just to the fighters, but to anyone who doubted him. If you're watching this far, this is just the first battle of a comeback no one believed possible. If you want to see how far Ollie went to prove himself right, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next part will show the fight that truly changed everything. The day idolatry became a burden began at Madison Square Garden. Walked through the tunnel to booze and flashbulbs, without dancing or verse. On the other side stood Joe Frazier, a tough champion who recognized no old crowns. The bell rang, and the air grew thick. Ollie tested the distance with jabs and tried to float. Frazier advanced with his chest out, his hands firm, his gaze cold. Each step shrank the canvas. In the first clinch, Ollie urged his opponent to calm down. Frazier growled that no one would quell his hunger. Ollie understood that night would be a sentence, not a spectacle. America was choosing a side, and he would feel every vote on his face. The crowd pulsed with division. Half wanted the former, king on the ground, the other half prayed for a miracle. The ring became a courtroom. Angelo Dundee screamed to use his leg, but his leg responded slowly. The years out of the ring took their toll. When Frazier's hook landed, the stands roared. There he raised his guard and understood the message. It would be war without verses. Go. Frazier marched like a train on an uphill climb. Ollie responded with quick jabs and sidesteps, but his leg locked in short curves. In the corner, Angelo spoke, bluntly, "Keep your distance. Touch and go. Don't accept exchanges." Ollie nodded, bit his pad, and returned. The opening rounds were his by inches and memory. The crowd swayed, and each silence felt like a trial. Frazier aimed for the body, pounding on the ribs like a hammer on an iron door. Ali's breathing became noisy. His guard dropped for a moment. He tried to sing the old song, to say he was fast, to provoke. His opponent didn't buy it. He responded with a short hook that doubled the former champion's torso. The bell saved him during the break. Ice on his face. Short words. Leg, Ollie, leg, Angelo repeated. He glanced sideways, trying to read the time in his trainer's eyes. Time was a merciless judge. Outside, signs announced that the traitor would learn to fall. Ollie clenched his fists and decided he would refuse to fall. More faith. In the eighth, the fight turned to stone. Ollie still found angles, but Frazier moved his head forward and crossed the jabs with his torso, spinning hooks that bit into the body and rose to the head. In the 10th, a left hook grazed the chin and made the leg buckle for a cruel second. Angelo yelled for the tie. Ollie clinched, breathed into Frazier's shoulder, mentally counted to 3, and released. He started playing again, dreaming again, that the judges still saw his art. At the end of the 11th, his vision darkened in a flash. He sat on the bench, his head heavy, and said he was fine. He wasn't. The night bites, the rounds flowed like a river against him. In the 15th, the entire city held its breath. Frazier planted his legs and unleashed the perfect hook. Ali's head swung like a door on a tired hinge. His body fell. Silence. He got up before the count ended, proud, wounded, stubborn. The fight ended in a decision for Frazier. The crowd erupted in verdicts. Some applauded. In the locker room hallway, the ice on his face burned more than the booze. They took Ollie to the hospital for tests. His jaw throbbed, but he was in one piece. Outside, microphones searched for blood and sound bites. Ollie said bluntly that he had only lost a fight, not the reason. Some critics smiled as if they had won with him. Others silently acknowledged his courage in standing. In the early hours of the morning, he returned to his hotel room and stared at the ceiling. There was no music, no rhyme, only a plan. Train until the world saw beyond the label. The next morning, he was in the gym, slower but more stubborn. America still divided him between traitor and icon. The bills wouldn't wait, the contracts wouldn't come back. But a boxer's faith is the sledgehammer that reopens doors. He vowed to get back on track, even if it cost him flesh and blood. Quarry would come again. Frazier would come again. And there would come a blow that would hurt more than all. The dry crack of Ken Norton's jaw against his fist. And that was the beginning. The crack came sharply, without warning, like wood splitting. Ken Norton lunged forward. His torso locked, unleashed a short hook, and Ollie's jaw cracked. He tasted iron, but remained standing. Madison Square Garden wasn't there. It was San Diego, a hostile ring, a crowd demanding a verdict. Angelo yelled for the tie. Ali shook his head, determined not to show pain. With each jab, the vibration in his bone felt like a knife. Norton was in no hurry. He walked forward, digging hooks into the body, testing the legend's endurance. Ollie spoke little, held his breath, protected his injured side, and still sought angles. The clock became the enemy. In the end, decision for Norton. The traitor, who had returned, was now the pariah who lost. Without a title, without forgiveness, his face throbbing, Ollie descended the ring steps as if carrying a verdict. Outside, microphones hunted for blood. He gave silence. In the locker room, the mirror showed a man who was whole on the outside and cracked on the inside. Still, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and the promise of a limit. The doctor spoke slowly about fractures, convalescence, prudence. His jaw would be immobilized. Silence would be mandatory. Ollie nodded without pride. He swallowed soup through a straw, wrote answers on crumpled papers, and heard on the radio that his was a legend in retreat. The bills didn't wait. The sponsors had already left. Old fans debated whether it was fair to see a man who defied war fall to a punch. He wasn't asking for compassion. He was asking for the ring. Angelo brought Norton films and paused frame by frame. High defense, short stride, head forward. You need your leg and time, he said. Time, Ollie knew, was expensive. When his jaw finally released the wires, the sound of the rope hitting the floor seemed like music. He trained in silence, inflating his lungs, rebuilding his reflexes. He asked for a rematch. They laughed. They said it was too early, that his era was over. He signed anyway. In Inglewood, he won a split decision. Booze. He moved on. Frazier arrived again. Posters announced old scores, with no promise of a title. Ali arrived light on his tongue and heavy on intention. The plan was simple. Touch and lock. Silence the fury. Score points. Madison Square Garden roared. Frazier brought the same hook. That had felled kings. Ali brought discipline and legs. Round after round, he gained inches of respect. Unanimous decision. There was no belt, but there was breathing room. Then the world watched George Foreman destroy Joe Frazier in Kingston. Like a tsunami through rotten wood, 2 knockdowns became 7. The champions seemed forged in iron. Each punch was a sentence. They asked Ali if he really wanted this. I do, he wrote on his forehead with his posture. Bundini whispered in his ear, we were kings. Angelo spoke. Softly, no vanity, cool heads. America laughed. They said Foreman would crush him in a few rounds. They called Ollie stubborn. He began speaking to the press, turning the tide with his phrases, challenging the giant with his microphone and his gaze. It was. The plane landed in Kinshasa at dawn. The air was heavy, electric, humid. Ollie went downstairs and heard a chorus he hadn't expected. Ollie Beaumay, giant killer. The outcast became hope. He smiled at the children at the fence, but he knew a smile can't defeat a hammer. Foreman trained with blows that made the bag sway. Like a bridge in a gale, Ollie practiced silence and breathing. He spoke less in open training sessions, speaking more into the ear of his own fear. In short meetings, Angelo outlined an idea that sounded like heresy. Tire the monster, offer one's body to the ropes, absorb, give back. For some, madness. For a few, calculation. At night, in the hotel room, the ceiling was a dark sea. Ollie thought of the lost title, the old jeers, the traitor's verdict glued to his skin. He clung to faith like someone lacing up gloves. He didn't ask for love, he asked for a chance. The rain beat on the canvas like impatient fingers. When the bell rings, he told himself, there will be no rhymes. There will be truth and pain. Dawn will decide destinies. The bell rang at the 20 de Mayo Stadium in Kinshasa, and the night grew small before 2 men with opposing stories. George Foreman stormed forward. Ali raised his guard and pressed his back against the ropes, as if accepting the risk and choosing his own battlefield. The champion hammered his arms and ribs, punch after punch, trying to wring air. The sound of the blows sounded like wood splitting. Ollie breathed shallowly, spoke softly, and returned sharp jabs to the giant's face. The crowd chanted Ollie Beaumay, and each syllable forced the breath back into the challenger's chest. In between, a torch to his face, water on the back of his neck, and a silent agreement. Endure, irritate, survive. Foreman shrugged, heavy, confident. Ali, with his eyes fixed, measured time like someone counting steps in the dark. There was no escape. There was waiting. And waiting, that night, was like a knife. Foreman continued to pursue from the first to the fourth round, trying to sink Ollie's will into a bottomless pit. The challenger offered his body to the ropes, locked his elbows, and supported the others, weight like an unyielding wall. When the champion dropped his guard to breathe, Ali would touch his face with 2-3 short blows and say something only the two of them could hear. A challenge without a shout. A message without anger: you get tired, I stay. Foreman's gloves began to lose their speed. Sweat turned into a river on his forehead. His arm moved a trickle slower. With every minute, the arena changed hands. Angelo, in the corner, urged a cool head. Bandini repeated that the world loves those who return. Ollie didn't respond. He knew that victory, if it came, would be born from the place few accept, the boundary between pain and calm. In the 6th and 7th, the fight turned into a tough fight. Foreman was still thundering, but he no longer broke down walls like he had at the beginning. Ollie began to move less backward and more sideways, landing short, sharp blows with the precision of someone waiting for a mistake and calling it by name. The clock became his ally. The crowd no longer begged for a miracle. They watched the patient construction of a moment. Foreman tried to pin the challenger in the corner and unleash everything at once. Ollie landed his forearms, tucked his chin behind his glove, and returned a straight punch that shook the champion's head. No shouting, just the message. I'm here. The sound of the bell brought a rare silence. For the first time, the giant looked at his own fatigue, and Ollie, deep down, understood that the risk had made sense. A landing blow was missing. A window was missing. The window opened in the 8th. Foreman entered wide, trying to shorten the gap with a spin that came from the ground. Ollie took a step back, then another, as if inviting and refusing at the same time, and unleashed a clean, quick, almost humble sequence. First a touch that closed the distance, then a full blow that twisted the champion's chin to the side. Foreman's body, until then a mountain, swayed as if losing its axis. 2 more blows and the world tilted. The champion fell slowly, as if time were stretching the ground to receive him. The count was a thunderclap counted on fingers. When the referee said 10, Kinshasa became a C. Ollie didn't run, didn't scream. He didn't need to. He raised his arms as if returning something that had been taken from him, the right to be seen without labels, the outcast who endured the stones, the voice that refused to be silenced, the man who chose to pay the price for a principle. The belt returned, and with it a new silence. The next morning, newspapers changed their tone. Some apologized quietly. Others pretended they hadn't spat before. Ollie didn't respond to the headlines. He sat in the still dark room, touched the cold metal of the headline, and let his memory do the work the world avoids, remembering the entire journey, the judge's gavel, the closed doors, the traitor label, the bills, the broken jaw, the booze that cut more than a punch, and finally, a hot night in Africa when he chose not to run, chose not to scream, chose simply to endure until his adversary showed he was also human. He didn't leave there a saint. He left as a man. And man, in that story, meant holding to one's word when it weighs more than gold. The crowd sang. His body ached. His faith remained. It was enough. The rebel's return wasn't about glory. It was about cost. About learning that conviction is prolonged hunger and a cold shoulder. About accepting a fall without hiding your face. About enduring what people say about you when you don't fit into others' molds. Ollie lost the title, lost money, lost easy affection. He earned scars that don't show in photos. And one day, facing a giant, he won without betraying himself. This doesn't make him an untouchable legend. It makes him proof that courage is also silence, calculation, patience, and pain. If this story has stuck with you, take with you a simple question. What price are you willing to pay for your word when no one is applauding? Sometimes the road back begins when you accept touching the ropes, breathing, and choosing not to give up, because some victories don't need rhymes, they need spine. And for real, what price are you willing to pay for your word when no one is applauding?